Hello, everyone. Welcome back to StatTech Research's seminar series on measuring progress and well-being. I'm Kelsey O'Connor, one of the organizers. Today, we are pleased to welcome Professor Boris Nikolaev to the series, who will speak about entrepreneurship and well-being, specifically the Entrepreneurship Well-being Premium. Before we get started, just a brief update on our third annual Measuring Progress workshop. So we just finished putting together the schedule and should be releasing it in the coming days, if not tomorrow. Back to today. So Boris will speak for around 40 minutes and then address questions at the end. If you have clarifying questions, you can raise your hand during the chat. You can also write in the chat at any time, but we'll come to more substantive questions toward the end. And also during the presentation, please keep your microphones muted. As a last reminder, we are recording the event. You'll be able to find this and past recordings on our website and YouTube channel. Now to introduce Professor Boris Nikolaev. So Professor Nikolaev, excuse me, is an associate professor and the Tracy Family Faculty Fellow at the College of Business at Colorado State University. He studies entrepreneurship, well-being, and how emerging technologies are impacting the future of work. He is also an editor at Entrepreneurship Theory and Practice and Foundations and Trends in Entrepreneurship. His research includes over 50 peer-reviewed publications, including a dozen articles in premier journals. His work has also been featured in The Economist, Forbes, TechCrunch, The Atlantic, and many other media outlets. He has received multiple researcher excellence awards, including the Habich Early Career Research Award and Business for Better World Research Award. It is a real pleasure to welcome Professor Boris Nikolaev. Without further ado, Boris, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Kelsey. And first of all, thank you everyone for being here today. I know at least here at CSU is the end of the semester. It's really busy time. So I imagine a lot of you are also kind of similar timeline as we're here. So this is the first time I'm actually presenting the paper to an audience. It's still kind of work in progress. So very much looking forward to your feedback, both during the presentation and at the end. So I also want to say that I'm extremely honored to be invited to be part of the seminar series. Not too long ago, I was a graduate student and was reading the works of the people that have appeared here on in the series. You know, Ute Stefan, Carol Graham, Carol Riff, you know, Andrew Clark, and so many others. So it's a privilege to be able to speak to you today. The paper that I want to talk about today, it's called Born to be Happy, Revisiting the Entrepreneurship Wellbeing Premium. It's actually relatively straightforward. So I'll plan to talk about 35, 40 minutes, and then we can have more time for comments and discussion. So once again, before I get started, thank you so much for having me today. So the title of the paper is Born to be Happy, but I want to start with this very iconic song called Born to be Wild by Steppenwolf. Have you guys heard this song before? Actually, let me play just a little, maybe the first minute of the... it's not playing. Come on. Oh, there you go. I'll just play the first 1 minute. I think it's relevant to... Oh, no, I can... Can you hear it?
No. Not hearing it.
Yes or no?
No. Unfortunately.
I guess I don't have the plugin to install the song, but did you hear anything at all?
No, okay. Sorry. Yeah.
Oh, no problem at all. Anyways, Born to be Wild. I imagine you guys have maybe heard this song before. But the reason why I kind of wanted to include this song is that when we think about entrepreneurship, we often imagine the Born to be Wild version of work, right? You know, freedom, independence, no boss, an open world, you know, adventure, possibilities, building something of your own. And this can be very exciting, right? So, and I think that much of the entrepreneurship literature has adopted a very similar logic, right? Entrepreneurs are happier because entrepreneurship gives you autonomy, it gives you freedom, it gives you control, it gives you psychological need fulfillment. You're on this kind of wild ride that's unpredictable, it's risky, it's demanding, but it's also very exciting and it's also deeply meaningful and fulfilling. And so in our paper, we argue and find actually, as I'll show you a little bit later, that much of the happiness premium is actually due to selection. So it's not entrepreneurship that makes you happier, but rather most people who become entrepreneurs already have certain personality traits and characteristics that are likely to make them happier, or just they were happier before they became entrepreneurs. So to use kind of the analogy from the song, it's not the motorcycle that creates the ride and the adventure, right? Rather, it's the people who choose to ride the motorcycle and go on the adventure are likely to be very different from the people that decide not to buy a motorcycle. And as a reference, I don't own a motorcycle. I probably never will. So so I like the kind of the song, and that's why we decided to use this title for a paper, because it has this nice double meaning, right? It foreshadows the results, but it also ties them back to one of the most iconic songs that I think nicely describes like how we often think about entrepreneurship as a wild ride, as a journey, adventure, freedom, and so on. So the question we kind of ask are entrepreneurs made happy by entrepreneurship? If you kind of read the literature, if you read the literature, quite often we use this causal language. You become an entrepreneur, something happens, and then you become, you're happier, more satisfied with your job, more satisfied with your life, higher levels of eudaimonic well-being, and so on. Or were they in some sense, born to be happy? So I think the entrepreneurship literature has very much treated self-employment like an open road. Like you get on the bike, you escape the boss, you become happier. And our paper kind of asks whether the bike caused the happiness, or whether happier, more agentic, maybe more risk-loving, resilient people are more likely to get on the bike in the first place. To motivate kind of this further, if you actually start reading articles in the popular press, you would find a ton of articles that suggest that entrepreneurship can make you both healthier and happier. Here's some articles that I just briefly yesterday as I was preparing for the presentation I found online. Here's from Inc. Research: entrepreneurs are happier and healthier than employees. Here's the Pew Research Center: self-employed people in the US are more likely than other workers to be highly satisfied with their jobs. Here's another one: research reveals link between life satisfaction and self-employment. Another one: the key to happiness, entrepreneurship, duh. Forbes: entrepreneurs are happier and healthier than employees. And here's the Guardian: where 91% of small business owners so darn happy. So at least, if you kind of start reading the popular press, not that you don't find the counter arguments in places, as entrepreneurship being stressful and so on. But there are a lot of articles that argue that we have this kind of stereotype for entrepreneurship that, you become an entrepreneur and that makes you happier. I actually went to ChatGPT and I was curious. I asked the question, can you create a picture of me? So here I just posted 2 reference images and I said, can you create a picture of me, one as an entrepreneur and one as an employee? I didn't try to prime it. I just said try to show the emotional states that come to mind, and I didn't say what kind of emotional state. So, and you can say on the left here, I am an entrepreneur, I'm smiling. On the right here, I'm an employee, clearly bored with my job. If you kind of zoom in, it's really interesting. It says another meeting could have been an email. They're really and of course, I did this in a couple of chats actually. Just to make sure that it's not just one, that it hallucinated something. So it kept doing the same thing. So if you look here, there is a poster on the wall: freedom, impact, growth, purpose, builder, dreamer. And then if you look at the other picture as employee, not owner, deadlines, our mission, deliver results, follow process, work hard, stay quiet. So very much, even the stereotype that large language models have about entrepreneurship is that one of an occupation where if people are happier being in that occupation. Of course, it's not just ChatGPT and the popular press. I think much of what we find in the popular press actually reflects academic research. Here is one of my most favorite reviews, a review paper by Ute Stefan, which was published in the Academy of Management Perspectives in 2018. A phenomenal review. I think I think she does such a good job, bringing everything together. There's so much going on in this literature. And the conclusion, if you just the beginning, you read the introduction, being an entrepreneur has been characterized as one of the most stressful jobs, with average earnings that are lower than if one were to work as a paid employee. Despite this, entrepreneurs report being extremely happy in their work and highly satisfied with their job. So, and this is a paper that, just in a few years has been cited over 1,000 times. So, and the point there is that we see this in academic research too. And I'm going to use Ute quite a bit and kind of cite Ute quite a bit in this presentation. She's one of my favorite scholars. And the reason I'm doing this is because she's done the best, I think one of the best kind of work synthesizing and integrating this literature. I'm not trying to pick on her in any way, So so I wanted to show you some of the papers that I have written, and I have perpetuated the same sort of idea that entrepreneurs are happier. So here are a few papers that have been published at ETP, JVB, Journal of Business Venturing, JBV. So my own research has, I have 4 or 5 papers that have found and reached out similar conclusions. And it's not just me or Ute. I mean, there's a very large literature. Here's GEM. Earlier Kelsey said, you guys collect GEM data. So this is a report that came 2014, very similar kind of ideas. And of course, the famous Benson Frey paper, being independent is a great thing. The idea of procedural utility, autonomy, and so on. Ute actually has one of the best kind of recent papers on the topic, her ETP meta-analysis that just came out a couple of years ago. And I think she talked about this meta-analysis when 2 years ago was here on, talking to you guys. So she finds that the premium indeed is real. We have 94 studies in the meta-analysis, 82 countries, and the overall well-being effect is about 0.12. This is the Koch-D. So it's a little higher for job satisfaction and a little lower for life satisfaction, about half of that 0.06. The effect is contextual. So for example, it depends whether we're talking about opportunity or necessity entrepreneurs. It depends on the institutional setting and the type of well-being. So not all well-being types have the same effect. But some of the kind of interesting quotes from the meta-analysis, unfortunately, this is a conclusion. Most studies are cross-sectional. So it's entirely possible to see a positive effect in the cross-section, but there's no effect on the individual level for a variety of different reasons, like selection is one of them. If you kind of read analysis, of course, the meta-analysis cannot disentangle causality. And, there's not much we can learn about, personal kind of differences and characteristics that may explain some of this premium. So what I want you to get from this is that this really, great meta-analysis shows that the well-being premium seems to be very real, right? So it's a real thing, but there's a question mark about what drives it, right? So, and that's where I think some of our research comes. Before I move on, I also wanted to also take a moment to discuss magnitude of the effects, because this is typically overlooked. So often I think especially in entrepreneurship and business, we find a positive significant effect and then we draw all sorts of conclusions. But in this particular case, I'm going to use in the meta-analysis, life satisfaction has had a Koch-D of 0.06. What does this mean? I mean, so here on the top left corner, you can see the red curve is employees, the green curve is entrepreneurs, right? So, and these two distributions essentially overlap 98%. So on a 0 to 10 life satisfaction scale, this translates to something like 0.06 of a point. So 7.73 versus 7.67, right? So if you randomly picked one person from each group, the entrepreneur would report higher life satisfaction only 51.6% of the time. So essentially it's a coin flip, right? This is the effect size from the meta-analysis covering 94 studies. So yes, the effect is real. The effect is positive, significant, but it's very, very small. And you can actually see like if you think of Koch-D, what is a small effect? Typically a small effect is a 0.2. And a little bit bigger effect, 0.70, with something like cognitive behavioral therapy. You can see the two different distributions, and a large effect would be 0.8. If you looked, for example, at adult height for women versus men, this is like in 1.4, so much larger. So again, what Koch-D shows is how many standard deviations lie between the means of the two groups, and we just simply find that the effect is very, very tiny, even if there's effect. So here, for example, I can give you two groups. There are 100 entrepreneurs and 100 employees. in each one of the groups, and you can see their well-being at the bottom. Everything is colored. And if I ask you which group is which, what do you guys think? Is the top or the bottom the entrepreneurs? Okay. Probably difficult to tell, right? So, yeah, it's the top one that's the entrepreneurs, but that's precisely the point. It's extremely difficult. The differences are so tiny, so it's very challenging to tell. So a couple of years ago, Ute was here and gave a presentation to this group, and Kelsey shared it with me. I really liked it. I think she did a phenomenal job summarizing the well-being literature. I'm a huge fan of her work, and she's been a huge inspiration for my own work. So I just wanted to share a few quotes that I highlighted watching the talk. She says, I think there is more to do to account for selection effects in entrepreneurship, but also out of entrepreneurship. She also talks about how in her own research, what we see is that actually people who have lower mental health well-being are more likely to become entrepreneurs. And one of the reasons is that, sometimes people with mental health disorders are more likely to select into entrepreneurship because it fits their lifestyle a little bit better. They don't have to comply necessarily with the 9-to-5 model. So again, some of the things that she talked about here to you guys is that we still need more evidence for selection. She also went through a very large number of explanations that can potentially explain the well-being premium. And here I created actually a word cloud using Claude. I don't know if you use this AI. So I added a few of my own explanations on top of her and what I've seen in the literature. So things range from autonomy, independence, job demands resources, self-determination, fulfillment of basic psychological needs. Carol Riff was recently here. So eudaimonic well-being, identity, person-environmental fit, better feedback, attribution of success, and so on. So at this point, our picture is kind of a small premium, almost entirely identified from cross-sectional research, and a positively enormous menu of mechanisms that could potentially explain it. So, and this is where I actually want to take a short detour and show you some kind of research that I'm working on right now that also motivates our research. We are currently working on a paper where we systematically reviewed over 3,000 papers. So essentially the whole corpus of papers at the 3 leading entrepreneurship journals, ETP, JBV, and SEJ. And we use large language models and machine learning methods to classify each paper on over 60 different criteria. So I wanted to show you some of these preliminary results because they're kind of relevant to what we're doing here. The first one is that, which is not surprising, is that we are obsessed with theory, right? So the typical paper today mentions the word theory, and those are in our 3 top leading journals, somewhere between 28 and 50 times. And so just to give you a sense of scale, there is a paper by Hambrick where he kind of had this benchmark for top management journals, and he was concerned about sort of our obsession with theory back in the day. So 2007, his benchmark is about 18. So now we've doubled that in entrepreneurship, roughly doubled. So every paper has to make a theoretical contribution. Every paper has to invoke the framework. So it's basically the price of admission. And, and I'm sure you all are familiar with the typical decision letter that you receive, a rejection letter, right? So great paper, not enough theoretical contribution. So we keep introducing new theories and perspectives. So here's an example of primary theories used in our leading journals. You can see that ETP alone at the left has accumulated 427 distinct primary theories across its corpus. JBV, almost 400. SEJ, it's a journal that started much later, but the very same pattern there as well. It's already at 145. And the curve is not flattening. I mean, if you look at it, we're still roughly adding 15, 20 new theoretical frameworks per year, every year at every journal. So the field is introducing theories at a remarkable rate. So here's where it gets really interesting to me, that most of these theories are used only a single time, and we never come back to test these theories again. So in ETP, we find that close to 70%, and that's across actually the 3 journals, the pattern is remarkably consistent. Only about 70% of the theories across these journals appear only once. Okay, so almost identical pattern across the journal. So roughly, I would say 7 out of 10 theories show up, get cited once to satisfy the theoretical contribution, the requirement that we have at the leading journals, and then disappear forever. I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Antonakis, but he has this really fun term called theoria, so which is a mania for new theory. So, and by the way, a lot of these theories aren't even native to entrepreneurship. We kind of looked at the top 20 theories, and the vast majority of them are actually imported from psychology, sociology, economics, strategy. And that's not necessarily bad. Borrowing can be very healthy, and entrepreneurship is a very new field. But again, it shows that kind of there is this inequality within our corpus of theories. Here's a paper, here's a graph that kind of shows like how we're using these theories. And what's really interesting is that about 50% of the theories we introduce are cited 3 times or less. And then the theories at the very top, they appear about 40% of the time. So a lot of like what papers cite is this very small canon at the very top, which is not even entrepreneurship. And then there is kind of this whole middle. And that's true across all 3 journals. So I'm not showing you this to be cynical. I think there's generally a lot of progress in the field. So here we kind of map like how the field has evolved over time. And you can see that we started with a very much atheoretical and phenomenon-driven field. Entrepreneurship is also a relatively very young field. And now we are very heavily focused on theory. So, but we're still doing a lot of building and extending across the 3 journals, and very little integration of theory, very little testing of theory. So barely any integration. When we looked at some of the published research, we found only 1 replication at DTP in the past 20 years. So, so that's one of our motivations for this paper, is that we need to see more of that. There is actually, I think that the culture is starting to shift now that the field is maturing and growing. And we're starting to see a little bit more emphasis on transparency and replication. I'm actually really happy that DTP is one of the top journals leading the way. Here is a recent DTP special issue on transparency and replication. And in the editorial, they emphasized 3 different things that are particularly important to our study. One is replication and robustness. Our study is very much a replication, and we go for transparency there, as I will show you in a little bit. The importance of no results, just like as we find in our paper, and it sort of focus on like longitudinal panel-based studies using secondary data. So essentially, many of the kind of challenges with this particular topic, entrepreneurship and well-being, cross-sectional dependence, under replication, theory bloat. I think this is a call here that this special issue is trying to fix. And I think that this gives us legitimacy to ask the questions that we want to explore in our paper. So kind of pulling all of these things together, why revisit the well-being premium now? I think 3 reasons. First, I think the evidence base is thinner than it looks, so we need more replications using better data, better methods. We have a ton of explanations and little evidence kind of sorting between them. We use a lot of causal language, both in the popular press and in sort of academic writing. And I think that this causal language has quite often outpaced the evidence, which is largely cross-sectional. Ute herself, pointed this out, and most of the evidence is cross-sectional. Yet we use this causal language, so we need stronger methods to keep testing our assumptions. And the third one is like our hypothesis that a lot of this well-being premium may be driven by selection, and the field itself have asked for like stronger designs to be able to separate who chooses to become an entrepreneur as well. So what we did is we, at a very high level, we have 2 data sets. We have MIDUS, and then we have this new study, the Global Flourishing Study, which is a brand new, couple of years old study with about 200,000 people across 23 countries. And it's longitudinal, which is really great. So the GFS study and analysis was fully pre-registered. So we had to do this before we even get to the data, which I think is really important because we're not going to get one of the comments where like, oh, you ran 1,000 regressions and you found something that's insignificant. We pre-registered everything, we got the data, we ran the analysis, and this is what happened. And then we also used, different kind of identification strategies, and I'll talk about them in just a second. We have 3 predictions. It's a replication study, so we call them hypotheses, but I'm not sure if this is the right way to approach this. But But for now, essentially what we want to do with hypothesis one is replicate the cross-sectional benchmark, that we see, the well-being premium that we see in cross-sectional studies, which is really well known. It's probably one of the kind of most consistent empirical regularities that we see in the literature. And if we don't replicate it, we have nothing to explain in a sense. The paper should end there, probably ask what is happening, why can we replicate it? Our prediction is that we will replicate this. I mean, it's really well documented across both studies. So the second hypothesis is that we want to stress test this well-being premium. And so that's where we kind of want to get to the real causal effect of entrepreneurship. And we're asking, is the association that we find in most cross-sectional studies, is it going to survive when we account for individual fixed effects, or like family, sibling, twin fixed effects? And then the final one is the selection one, where we want to also extend things. There's studies that have done this previously, have shown that entrepreneurs are in many ways different than employees. So if selection is really driving the well-being premium, then we have this test where we want to ask if future entrepreneurs should already differ from the people that stay employed, even while they're still waged employed. So in a sense, like H1 is our sanity check, H2 is our stress test, and H3 is sort of like a direct test for selection. The first study, so our first analysis is from MIDUS, which is I don't know if you guys are familiar with MIDUS, is the Midlife in the United States. It has been running, since 1995. It has 3 waves, so almost 20 years of follow-up. The sample is about 15,000 person wave observations, 7,000 unique individuals that we start in wave 1, and we have about 5,200 families. Self-employment around 13% in each wave, which is very consistent with US national patterns. What I really like about MIDUS is the depth of psychological measurements. They have 9 well-being outcomes. They have personality traits, the big 5. They have optimism. They have sense of control, 8 different coping strategies. And MIDUS importantly oversamples on twins and siblings, which allows us to, we have this very rich panel with ton of well-being variables, and we actually can identify the families, the sibling pairs and twins. So a really great kind of study to get started. So once again, kind of our identification strategy in different steps. We start with a pooled cross-section, then we move to individual fixed effects, then we do sibling fixed effects, twin fixed effects, and then we do our pre-transition design. So let me show you the results very quickly. I have about 10 minutes to do that, and then we'll open for discussion. So the cross-sectional premium in the MIDUS data set replicates beautifully. I mean, you can see here, essentially every single well-being variable with exception of positive effect replicates, so significant. The effect is relatively small. Here you can see that 0.2 is the small effect of Koch and D. Those are standardized effects, so just to see small effect, just like Ute's study, the meta-analysis. So, but it replicates, it's real, it's there, and we see it in almost every well-being measure that we included in the study. However, we moved to individual fixed effects, the same data set, same outcomes, but now we are following the same person across waves. So we're looking at transitions and changes in their employment status. And by the way, just to clarify, those are not people that are transitioning from unemployment. So we're not looking for like necessity entrepreneurs, but those are people that have jobs, right? And so they're transitioning. Same thing is with our Global Flourishing Study. So just to clarify that. So we add the individual fixed effects, and none of the outcomes actually survive. And some of the outcomes actually flip sign and become insignificant. But the big kind of problem here is that we have also 8 to 9 years between waves. So it's a very, very, very long period of time. Maybe the effect is like short-lived, you become an entrepreneur, and then over time, as we would expect, you adapt. Okay, so here is our siblings and twin estimations. And just across sibling pairs, we find that autonomy and life satisfaction seems to be positive, marginally significant for life satisfaction. When we add, lagged well-being and personality, the effect disappears. And across, our twin pairs, we actually find that the effect is not significant at all. So here's a kind of, a summary of all the tests that we ran in the same place. and each row here is a well-being outcome, and each column is a different kind of identification strategy. And you can see that the pattern is pretty systematic to be called noisy. So as you climb kind of the identification ladder, the premium tends to fall off. When we compare like monozygotic twins, none of the effect is significant. Same thing with dizygotic and twins, siblings with adding personality, individual fixed effects. So the well-being premium replicates very well in the cross section, but then not so much in when you make the identification stronger. And there's some issues with our analysis. We're not claiming this is perfect. You can always find reasons why why this is not ideal. So all right, so here's our kind of interesting test in my mind. So here what we're doing is we take everyone who is currently employed and split them into two groups, and we say, so we look at those who will become entrepreneurs in the next wave, but who are currently still employed. And so then we compare their well-being with everyone else who is employed. And what we find out is that future entrepreneurs report, on many dimensions, report, higher levels of well-being relative to currently they're employed to other people who are employed. These people, by the way, again, are people who are still working for somebody else, for a boss, right? So when the measurements are taken, so they're not entrepreneurs yet. They also have distinctive psychological profiles. So if you look here, they're much higher on openness, they're much higher on extroversion, they're much lower on neuroticism. They actually already report much higher levels of agency. We also looked at different coping strategies, which we have only for 2 waves, and you can see that they use much more positive reinterpretation, which is a type of problem focus strategy, problem coping focus strategy, less denial. So future entrepreneurs, while still employees, have this kind of distinct personality, characteristics, and a lot of these personality traits are associated with higher levels of well-being. So extroversion, lower neuroticism, I mean, that's pretty well documented in the literature. So we also did pre-exit analysis. So these are entrepreneurs who eventually exit in the future, just to see what we find there. And we don't find actually any meaningful personality differences there. So once you're an entrepreneur, eventually you may exit. We do find some marginally significant effects with negative effect and lower life satisfaction. Perhaps, that kind of reflects that maybe the entrepreneurs that, have businesses that are not doing very well eventually would exit. They're less satisfied with, their life, or, they have higher levels of negative effect, which is the one. So MIDUS is, again, one data set, 3 waves. So the waves are 9 to 10 years apart, 3 waves. Maybe this is just an artifact of MIDUS, it's just the United States, right? So we replicated everything with a Global Flourishing Study. GFS is probably one of the largest, as I'm aware. So for you, Kelsey, and your group, I think, really great resource. I don't know if you have had a chance to use it already, but one of the largest cross-national well-being panel that's currently available. About 200,000 people across 23 countries, from, I think, Argentina to Indonesia to Japan. 2 waves right now spaced apart 1 year, so much shorter period of time. So we can kind of look at if the effect, replicates in a much shorter time span. And the survey was also collected 2023 and 2024, so very different time span than MIDUS. So independent design, independent instruments, independent geography, and we had to pre-register everything to even get the data. So I think sort of the peak hacking sort of criticism potentially of our study is off the table. And in our study, we have about 171,000 person wave observations, 23 countries, and 4,300 people that switch, from employed to self-employed. So I think we have plenty of variation to run our fixed effects models. And here's the results from the GFS replication. Very similar story. So on the left, the cross-section effect replicates across all of the well-being outcome variables that we have. Entrepreneurs come out to have higher levels of well-being than employees. And then you move to the right, individual fixed effects, and we find nothing is significant. A lot of these variables actually even switch signs. Again, here remember GFS is waves are only 1 year apart. So MIDUS is like 9 to 10 years apart. So I think we can't blame the disappearance on kind of the long time span between waves in MIDUS and some form of like adaptation effect when the premium just disappears within a year in this panel. The selection signature also shows up in the global sample too. So here is what happens to future entrepreneurs, people that are currently employees again, but eventually transition. They appear to be much happier, higher life satisfaction, higher happiness, they report higher levels of freedom, autonomy, feeling capable, and they have different personality traits again, like they're high on the extroversion and high on openness. So this is kind of to sum, because I have a couple more minutes to do this, but what does this all mean? We've replicated, we've stress tested, and we've replicated again kind of this entrepreneurship well-being premium. And so the first thing is like, of course, I went to ChatGPT. I uploaded my paper, and I said, how would you now create these pictures of me as an entrepreneur and an employee? And those are the new pictures. Now you can barely tell a difference, right? So it's interesting how it also changes its perspective. While it still kept some of the positive things about entrepreneurship, now you can see a picture of my family, benefits and paycheck when you're an employee, and I still have a smile. So so that was interesting. We updated ChatGPT's biases and priors. Oh yeah, and that's another picture it created of me. I am about to buy a bike now. So but joke aside, I think our study does question kind of the traditional story that we hear, which is that entrepreneurship causes autonomy and meaning and need satisfaction, which causes well-being. I think what we found in our study is that the very things we usually cite as mediators or mechanisms, things like eudaimonic well-being, personal growth, purpose, agency, adaptive coping, sense of control, a lot of these things actually show up as pre-existing mechanisms, right? We find that entrepreneurs, even before they transition, are high on these things, a little bit higher on these things. So I think mediation models that infer mechanisms from cross-sectional differences without modeling sort of baseline well-being or like personality, without having like a panel data so they can account for timing, they may be confounding sort of selection with treatment. So to be clear, that doesn't mean that procedural utility or job demands resources or self-determination or personal environment of fit are wrong. It just means that the case for them as being causal explanations for the well-being premium of entrepreneurship isn't really closed yet, and I think we need more evidence there. And I think this is what our study is trying to say. And so I think in terms of practice, I think quite often we prescribe kind of entrepreneurship as a happiness pill, like this article, the key to happiness, entrepreneurship. I think we shouldn't romanticize entrepreneurship. I think that for some people, maybe this is a great kind of path. For other people, maybe not so much. And I think Ute had really great reasons why. I think in my mind, we have to shift the question from whether entrepreneurship is going to make you happier to how can we support entrepreneurs once they become entrepreneurs, right? So because the journey can be very difficult, and help potential entrepreneurs evaluate fit for this. The study obviously has a lot of the common issues related to like entrepreneurship studies. Heterogeneity is a huge issue, obviously, and Ute talks about this in the meta-analysis in her review. We use self-employment here is defined as a dummy. So we can't really differentiate between different types of entrepreneurship, and we have a tendency to do this in the entrepreneurship literature, partly because the data is pretty poor. So we use a dummy, entrepreneur, not entrepreneur, but clearly there's all sorts of entrepreneurs. There's high growth entrepreneurs, there's gig workers, there's hobby entrepreneurs, there's necessity entrepreneurs. So we need to also kind of think about all these different types of entrepreneurs. Timing is another one. I think obviously if we had the Global Flourishing Study would have, I think they just finished their third round of data collection, so we will have more data. But as they keep accumulating data, I think it would be much easier to also model anticipation and sort of novelty or adaptation effects. Right now, we can't really do this very well, so we're kind of making assumptions. Mechanisms, I think the mediators are often kind of inferred from the cross-sectional data. I think measuring baseline well-being and all these other factors that I talked about, and testing the mediators directly, I think it's important. And keep doing replications. I think this is, as I argued here in the presentation, I think that those are very valuable for us to help us test and integrate what we already know. Just wanted to mention there's a new editorial at ETP that's coming, and kind of echoing like some of what we've learned from this study is investing in data quality for high impact entrepreneurship research. And that is one of the grand challenges, I think, of our field. You know, entrepreneurship data is very difficult to find. Like, you know, most entrepreneurs are very busy. They don't have the time to go and take surveys on Prolific. So we need to think of novel and interesting methods where we can study entrepreneurs and how we can collect data. Three things to remember: the well-being premium is real. In our study, we make an argument that it's very likely that this premium is largely driven by selection. It's not that there is nothing real about it, but we need more studies to kind of investigate this. So happy entrepreneurs perhaps were happy first, you know. So and then we need better tests and more replication. So yeah. 43 minutes, Kelsey. I hope I hit the mark, you know, as we started. So thank you so much for being here, and really appreciate your time, and looking forward to kind of hearing your thoughts and getting some ideas how we can improve the study, where we can go from here. And again, thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Thank you very much.
Should I stop sharing my screen, or?
You know, it helps. You could always go back if somebody asks, but otherwise,
okay,
this is perfect.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah,
this is great.
This way, I can see everybody a little bit easier, kind of on the screen.
Yes, indeed. So please feel free to write in the chat or raise your virtual hands. I can go ahead and start us off. It seems like, Boris, we went from a win-win situation to just a win situation, where because there's no negative effects of entrepreneurship, or at least as the way you've described it. So we can think of entrepreneurship as being maybe positive for the economy, or at least that's how economists like to portray it. And you know, before we thought it was also good for well-being. Now maybe it's has no impact on well-being, and we still have the economy side. So that's one part. The second part is maybe the selection effect is positive, as you described, and the treatment effect, or the effect of actually being an entrepreneur, is negative, offsetting the positive effect that they started with. So do you have a sense of that? Because it seems like it might be borne out by some of your data in terms of the effect size before they became entrepreneurs, and then after they became entrepreneurs, their well-being was really not distinguishable. If that makes sense.
No, it makes sense. So, I wonder, what do you think would be a good test to test this? Because in some ways our selection effect is also cross-sectional, right? What we did is, like we said, we identify the people that eventually will become entrepreneurs, and in the cross-section we do find, like if you compare entrepreneurs today with employees, we do find that entrepreneurs are slightly happier, right, on many different dimensions. So, and what we just essentially showed is, like, look, if you look at the people before they transition, right, they also show like being slightly happier. They have different personality traits that are often associated with like our happiness. So I don't see the evidence there that entrepreneurship makes them unhappy and offsets things. So I wonder what would be a better way to approach that. Like, what tests would you add to kind of focus? Yeah,
you just said it perfectly, actually. So, but I think the effect size in the MIDUS data before they become entrepreneurs, say the Cohen's D, let's say it was a 0.2, and so they were much more happy before becoming entrepreneurs, and then when they are entrepreneurs, they're only a little bit happier.
Yep.
So it looks like their premium was reduced after becoming
I see what
entrepreneur.
you mean, yeah. So compare the effects before and after for the different kind of
just for it's a little bit of a back of the envelope. It's not a perfect calculation. Unless you do a I don't know, seemingly unrelated estimate to try to compare coefficients or something. But
that's a good point. Yeah. Yeah, we definitely can do this. I think that's a good idea. So we should look at this, and there are definitely differences between we kind of wanted to have this bigger picture of like 9 well-being outcomes, versus so not each one of them. So before they transition, life satisfaction is insignificant, so but
Right.
after they transition, it seems that there is a cross-sectional effect that's somewhat small, but is there. And then the other part is that the effect, again, going back to like the magnitude of the effects, they're just so small, right? I mean, they're really, really tiny. We don't even get to the in any of the measures, in not in the cross-section, not in the pre-selection kind of tests. We don't even get to like a 0.2 Cohen or like a standardized effect. Like, so most of them are like between 0.5 and 0.10. So, and I showed you sort of what this means. It's like a coin flip, right? So they're very, very tiny, and I think that at least on the aggregate, like if you just compare entrepreneurs to non-entrepreneurs, you basically you see no effect, right? In my mind, that's meaningful in terms of magnitude. But can there be differences in subgroups, like very successful entrepreneurs versus or high growth entrepreneurs versus other type of employees? I think that yes, I think definitely we could see that if we had the data to be able to do this. So yes, Francesco, I think you had your.
Yes, great. Actually, it's a little bit of a follow-up because I understand that basically it's not entrepreneurship that makes you happy, but rather that if you're happy, you have higher chances to start a company. But then I wonder, once you start, what happens to your happiness? In other words, does the job of being an entrepreneur increases your happiness over time or decreases it? And the same reasoning that have been put forward in order to explain why entrepreneurship might benefit your well-being could still apply within the profession. For instance, actually, I mainly see negative examples. So the stress, the worry, managing clients, managing employees, these are all elements that could then worsen your well-being over time. So basically, probably my question is, could boil down, do we have any panel study that would allow us to track the well-being of entrepreneurs over time and see how it evolves?
No, that's a very good question. Excellent question. And that's precisely, I think, the question that we need to be thinking about. And to answer that question, I think we need like really rich longitudinal data. To be fair, there are a lot of longitudinal studies that track well-being over time, and they document their studies that document kind of adaptation effects or anticipation effects. So I think our study. So for example, we have studies that use the German socioeconomic panel, or like, the household of income dynamics, labor income dynamics in Australia survey. So those are long panels over 20 years or so, right? And so we can technically track entrepreneurs over longer periods of time. I think one of the issues quite often is really the quality of the data. It's survey data, it's self-reported. The way we measure entrepreneurship is also like with dummies, like are you an entrepreneur versus not? And I think like you're hitting to the, your question is excellent because it hits the most important kind of point in my mind. Entrepreneurship is not one homogeneous thing, right? So we think of entrepreneurship and we're like kind of put everything together, right? But entrepreneurs are very different. There's like small business owners, they're hobby entrepreneurs. There are people that, the electrician that comes and helps me renovate my basement. They're the people that start like high growth startups. They're the young folks that go to like San Francisco and, want to make it. So it's so heterogeneous that I think it's very difficult to, given sort of the data that we have and the way we study entrepreneurship, to answer these questions because they're so nuanced, right? So the same thing with employees. I think there are jobs and there are jobs, right? I mean, if you look, for example, what is it? I think Gallup had a survey, and they've been asking this question: how engaged people are at their work, for a long time. And what they find out, and I think in the United States, about a third or something of people are disengaged from their work, right? So they do the very bare minimum to just get by. So they don't like their work, right? And then about I think 60-something% of people are barely engaged at their work, you know. So but then at the top, you know, you have 30-something% of people that are very engaged with their work, so they love their work. So so I think like when we make these comparisons, like employee versus like, you know, self-employed person, we look at these aggregates that in some ways they're informative. Maybe they can tell us about, you know, what is going on. And I think, you know, this is kind of, I think the main, I would say, maybe criticism of that we're trying to bring to our paper is that, look, you know, with a lot of the studies out there are just using this approach, like, you know, aggregate approach, you know, employee versus self-employed. And then we find a small positive correlation, and then we have these articles. Entrepreneurship makes you happy, right? So become an entrepreneur because, you know, it's the panacea of whatever. And we want to say that, look, if you actually push this a little bit more, like, you know, use a little bit stronger identification. Not that our study is perfect, and I think you'll find plenty of criticisms there as well, like the timing, not enough, like, you know, not enough years to look for anticipation, adaptation. But at least what we see is, like, you know, in this really big, in my mind, like cross-section that's longitudinal for the first time. We have this across many countries, consistent, you know, over right now only 2 years, but soon 3, 4. I think we see that this effect disappears when you push it a little bit. And so at the aggregate, at least, I don't think this gives us enough evidence to draw any of the conclusions that you made, for example, in the sense of, like, does entrepreneurship lead to significantly more stress and then, you know, less happiness? You know, starting a business, I had started a couple of businesses. It is very stressful. You work all the time. You don't make a lot of money, you know, so some people may hit it, like strike it, like, you know, they may have a little bit of luck, and maybe within a year they can see the benefits. And it is also very fulfilling in many different ways. You're working for yourself. But so that's the other thing. I think there are lots of trade-offs between the different well-being components that go into it. Like, you could experience high level of anxiety and stress and also feel like deeply fulfilled because you in your mind, you're doing something that you always wanted to do all your life, right? So I mean, I'm sorry, I don't think I answered your question perfectly, but but I think it's a really good question. I think you spot on.
Thank you very much. Very reasonable points, and I'm sure that it also helped providing further food for thought to others. So thanks a lot.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. So
You had
I see a couple of questions here in the chat.
Yeah, I'll read it out
Yeah.
for sake of the recording, and it ties in with what was just being discussed a bit. So Marta says, great presentation, thanks a lot. It was interesting to see the different dimensions of what you called the selection signature. In the MIDUS analysis, future entrepreneurs appeared higher, mostly in eudaimonic aspects of well-being, whereas in the Global Flourishing Study, more hedonic dimensions seem to be more predominant. Do you have any thoughts on that?
It's a great question. I actually haven't thought about this. I think from what I remember, the Global Flourishing Study, actually every single well-being variable was significant. So it wasn't just the eudaimonic. I think what we found out is if we go back to the presentation, each one of them is significant. What varied there was a little bit sort of the, I think the magnitude of the effect, but all magnitudes are relatively small. But that's an excellent observation. I don't have anything on top of my mind. I have to think about this. Why would be a difference between the two? But I agree. This is something I noticed too. I think in the MIDUS data set, the pre-selection signature, when it comes to well-being, was primarily eudaimonic, right? So personal growth, I think, was the number one, like the strongest effect. And then I think at the very bottom, like we don't find any selection signature for life satisfaction or, I think, positive effect. We did find in both studies like signature for personality, you know, so I think that was very consistent. Just only one of the traits wasn't. There is also one thing I should mention is that, and I didn't have time to talk about this, is that both studies use very different kind of scales, measurement scales, to measure the different sort of variables. I think in some ways this is a strength of our research because it shows that, you know, this effect replicates even when you have different measurement and approaches. But MIDUS has very long validated scales. So For example, if you look at like eudaimonic well-being, they're using we're using Carol Riff's a scale of psychological functioning across the 6 dimensions, right? And we have many items to measure that. In the Global Flourishing Study, everything is single item. So life satisfaction is a single question. Happiness is a single question. There's quite a bit of research that validates like single items, and shows that they're a reasonable way to approximate, well-being, as you guys know and study. But that could be one of the reasons. We may be capturing slightly different things between the 2 surveys. So I would say something to definitely for me to think about. Thank you for the question. Yeah.
Related to that, I'll just piggyback while I have the chance. There's also a very big difference in time frame between the 2. So one is annual and the other one has 9 to 10 years. And so one thing that's happening is that you have people who are getting older over this period of time.
Oh, yeah.
Over the 9 to 10 year period. So you have very different mechanics between these 2 surveys.
That's a really good question. And I think it may actually explain very well like the eudaimonic well-being part, because, as you age, I imagine you kind of can reflect a little bit more on the eudaimonic dimensions, right? I mean, you accumulate, you get better at what you do. So you feel a higher sense of mastery, you grow as a person. So maybe you feel like, again, like it's called the Midlife in Development survey. So the average age is like, the first wave 40, I mean, maybe close to 50, right? So 45, 50. So those are people that are not like very young, right? So, and while in the Global Flourishing Study, it's just more balanced. So that's an excellent actually point. Something maybe we need to address in the paper.
So if it's all right with you and everyone, so we would normally close, but we have a couple of questions in the chat. So Boris, if it's all right with you, we can try to just address these last 3 questions, and then we can close it. So does that work? You stay a few minutes later?
Oh yeah, no, I'm
okay,
perfectly
great.
fine. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, great. So Ina's question is, thank you very much for your insightful studies. How do you envision the future of well-being in entrepreneurship research? In particular, what advice would you give to an early or mid-career scholar that plans a pipeline of papers and development for the next 5 to 10 years?
Oh,
in addition to
gosh.
longitudinal research and developing into different types of entrepreneurs?
Man, this is such a good question, and it's so difficult to answer right now. I think partly because especially with AI and everything that's happening in the world, I feel like making predictions about 5 to 10 years from now are very challenging. So I'm simply not sure. I really have to be honest here. I think it's an excellent question. I'm actually very sympathetic to people that are starting their careers right now. And one of the biggest challenges right now is that it's so easy to put together papers with AI. And if you look at DTP, for example, it used to be the case, I think a few years ago, we would receive like, maybe 500 papers, like, I don't know, a decade ago. Now this number is like pushing probably 1,300, 1,500, and it's really growing very, very rapidly. So being able to stand out in a sea that, in my mind, as AI improves and gets better and it becomes easier to put together papers, what would happen in my mind is that the signal to noise ratio is going to compress. And I think peer review has always been a little bit random. I think it has always involved a little bit of luck, right? So we all know that, like, you go and submit a paper and like reviewer 1 loves your paper, reviewer 2 always hates it, right? And reviewer 2 is like, so one reviewer likes the theory, the other one hates it, so it's really inconsistent. And I think that, and I think at the end of the day, like being able to publish papers has always been, I think in some ways, have a lot of ideas, try different things, try to have, publish more, submit more. And, and I think over time, like as you submit, like, quality is going to come through, the noise is going to go away. But I think with AI, this is becoming increasingly difficult to sort through that. And so the implication is that moving forward, I think a lot more of your success is going to be driven by factors that are different. And that's my view, of course. I mean, many people can share a different view, but I think like merit is going to unfortunately, matter less, and it would be noise, idiosyncratic things that are going to matter more, unless we figure it out. So I don't know. I haven't seen anything that has helped us figure it out. So I have a lot of sympathy for people that are starting now. I mean, I'm mid-career scorer myself, and I ask myself these questions too. And the system is extremely competitive. It's going to become even more competitive. So yeah, I mean, I'm not sure what the best advice is. I think hang in there, just have confidence that things are going to work out. But yeah, I don't have a specific advice, unfortunately. Yeah.
So the next question was, thank you for that. That's still helpful to have your view, especially also as an editor. The next question is about collecting high quality entrepreneurship data. And I think this was partially in light of your comment earlier about entrepreneurs not wanting to respond to surveys.
Yeah, it's an excellent question. And I think it's one of the biggest kind of grand challenges of the field right now. So there are different types of entrepreneurship data, of course. And, Kelsey, you have an economics entrepreneurship unit. So obviously collecting data there may be very different than collecting data that, I want to study the psychology of entrepreneurs, which means that I want to interview individual entrepreneurs, right? So that's a little bit different than getting data on businesses, on firms, on growth rates. So in terms of collecting high quality entrepreneurship data, one of the actually most promising things that I think right now is actually using large language models to collect data. I think that there is very promising research that's coming. A lot of the data that we have out there, it's actually qualitative, it's textual, whether it's like Reddit posts, whether it's pitches. And I think that now have the tool to be able to classify, to organize, and to analyze this data in very meaningful ways. And so I'm very bullish on actually using large language models and AI to collect data. Data that's out there, it's unstructured, it's it just exists. Like, for example, go to Reddit sort of subreddit, like our entrepreneur, our startup, and you can download gazillions of posts, and you can start analyzing them with AI. So I think this is a promising kind of avenue to collect data. As soon as look for the editorial on collecting high quality data that Johan and a few of his colleagues have already written. I think they have some good ideas there as well, kind of moving forward. But yeah, so I would say this is one very practical way in which almost anybody can do this with AI. You can go scrape the data, and you can use large language models to analyze it. It essentially, like what used to take like many weeks and tons of money to be able to do this. Now you can do it with AI, and AI is pretty good at labeling the data, very comparable to humans. So
you should know that the GEM also has a national experts survey.
Yep, that's true.
Okay, and that is text, based responses. So it's overlapping, and it gets more into some of these issues. I think maybe not full on psychology, but a little more open ended. We've got a question from Young One. So, are you concerned about the fact that both of your panels have a very limited number of waves, so 2 to 3 waves, and that could be causing the null effects when using fixed effects?
I mean, it's always a concern, right? I mean, essentially, I would absolutely love to have better data and longer panels. But at the same time, I also think that, the strength of our evidence is more aggregate, so we document very similar kind of results across 2 completely different, surveys, very different time span. One is 1 year, the other one is like, over 2 decades, right? We also use not just fixed effects models, but we also use like twins and sibling fixed effects, which is a little bit different approach, right? So, and essentially, yes, even if, I would imagine that, yes, having more transitions, would be better for have more variation within person variation. But we do have, I think, plenty of variation, you know, in the cross section with the Global Flourishing Study. We have over 4,000 transitions, and I would say that, you know, even there, you know, within a year, 4,000 transitions, we document the similar no effect. So so yeah, I mean, I think it's a valid kind of point that, and criticism for the study. But again, like I'm kind of thinking of, like, you know, all the different tests and, you know, both surveys, you know, so on aggregate, like when you triangulate the evidence, where does this evidence lead and what does it point to? So in my mind, you know, is it perfect? Absolutely not. We can always do better. We actually thought about bringing another survey, you know, which is like maybe have like a very long panel, like the German socioeconomic panel or Hilda, that would kind of alleviate some of the concerns, you know, and we may do this in the future. So at the moment, like that's how far we're with the paper. So, but thank you for the comment. I think it's a good and legitimate kind of concern.
Thank you very much. So we are after time, and I see Anna has just asked for links, which we can address afterwards. So I think at that we can close it. So Boris, if you have any closing remarks for us, and I'd like to say thank you to all of the participants as well as Boris for giving us this nice presentation.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thank you guys for having me here. It was a blast being able to participate and being able to virtually meet all of you. So thank you for all the people that joined, and you know, wishing you all of you success and best of luck. You know, so and keep doing this. I mean, I love this format. You know, so I think it's very informative, and I'm a fan, so I'm gonna keep watching your videos on YouTube. So so thank you guys. Yeah.